and welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. What a treat. We have got Natalie Lupi and Kevin Baker from Tuscarawas Broadcasting Company with us this morning, and we'll tell you why in just a moment. But first of all, good morning, guys. How are you?
Good morning, Susie. It's nice to talk with you.
Always nice to talk with you, too. Hey, Kevin, you there?
Yes, I am. Good morning to you.
Well, thank you for joining us. The reason that we're all getting together here this morning is because there's a big celebration about to happen in a few months. Natalie, tell us what is going on.
Well, in November the 2nd of 1920, I don't know when that really was, wasn't around, but that's when the first radio went on the air, the first commercial. So this is the 100th year for radio. And so it's a celebration of broadcast radio being a free and local service, keeping America's communities informed, entertained, and connected. And so we want to celebrate that.
Can I be honest and just say that I'm surprised that radio is only 100 years old?
Well, when you think about it, you think about maybe it being a lot longer, but
yes.
Not so much.
Yeah. Well, a big part of those 100 years was a gentleman by the name of Jim Natoli. And you know him well, Natalie. How is that?
Well, I know him very well. That was my uncle. He was one of 9 children, and he was the middle child. He was the 5th child. And I knew him by living with him and my grandmother and my mother and I many years ago. And a lot of memories there with Jim because Jim was a real pioneer. And because of his efforts of having a vision, especially his talent in engineering and broadcasting, Jim was able to, along with his mother, develop the first of the Tuscarawas Broadcasting Company charter company, so the corporation, and they began this back in 1959. It was pretty exciting as I started looking at some of this, of the old charter and the purpose and the things that they began, but they had a vision, and because of that, we have the company today, WBTC and WNPQ.
He passed a couple of years ago at just shy of 99 years old. So his time in radio was a big chunk of the whole history of radio, and the impact that he had on Northeast Ohio is really immense. Can you touch on that a little bit? What got him started in this? What was his passion with it?
So, he graduated in 1936 from Uricksville, and he went into the Army from 1941 to 1944, and he was a staff sergeant and was involved in the Signal Corps and along with the Morse code. And I remember him telling me some of these things that he was infatuated with the electrical side of things. He went to Akron University, and he worked for the FCC when they first kind of did the license requirements, because you used to have first and second class license, and he was a first-class licensed engineer. And so that was sort of his passion. He was in Detroit. He was in North Carolina when he first got started in radio, and he worked for 30 years with WKYC in Cleveland. He was a cameraman. And he used to do all of the video programs. They gave him all the different jobs. Jim was the kind of guy that if he didn't know how to do it, he was just going to figure out how to do it.
I always thought it was so fun to step into his office. Don't know if I was allowed or not, but I would every once in a while peek in there just to see the memorabilia.
Well, you need to come back down and look at it because we have really not taken anything out of there.
It's so cool.
There's a lot of things. And in fact, I'm in his office right now. We keep his name in here. I have all his stuff up. And yes, he had a lot of recognition because he was well thought of. He was a pioneer, began when, radio was just first, thought about. Yeah. And Jim was just passionate about it.
Yes. And television. The fact that he was cameraman for, am I right, the Barnaby and Woodrow show and all those things we used to watch as kids?
Oh, yeah. And, the funny thing is he actually would bring people to the home. We lived on a farm. It was an Natoli farm, and we had dairy cattle and pigs and all different kinds of things. And my grandmother, who was part of, on the corporation side, Mary Natoli, she was from Messina, Sicily, and she was so proud that she got her, she became a citizen in 1941. And she was so proud of that because when she came to this country, she did not know the American language. And they had this farm, and they were very hard workers. And that was one of the things that, as a kid growing up on the farm, they were pretty passionate about working, pretty passionate about, having a purpose and so forth. So he would bring people to the house that he would meet on the TV shows. So he knew Mona Scott. He knew Doug Adair. I remember him bringing the girlfriend of Sam Shepard to our house. It was just a small little girl, and this woman, she was very beautiful. She was from Germany. And he used to bring different people. And Barnaby, he actually brought down to the station to bring and have him on the air. So Jim was the kind of a person that if there was any type of a gadget he'd learned from being on TV, he'd bring it home. And it was kind of exciting because when the first, black and white TV started, Jim would bring this bag of tubes and change the tubes, in the TV that sort of went out, because if you didn't have any TV until Jim would come back because he would drive back and forth. He lived in Cleveland. He stayed with a family there. And, there's a lot of memories there because one of the individuals, particularly Jim Davison, he learned a lot about radio. He was very passionate about radio. And Jim was actually, very passionate in trying to teach him about those different things. So Jim was quite a guy. And he definitely would share his passion.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, where did you come into the picture? Your paths crossed at one point, and he had certainly a huge impact on your life.
Well, that would go back to the year of 1980. How I got involved was Jim would have live broadcasts from the Monroe Mall in New Philadelphia. And so with that being said, it opened the door where I could come in and practice and maybe go on air. And at that time, the program director, Sonny Skidmore, come up with the idea of having people come in, actually off the street, and give them an hour debut, maybe weekend or evening time. So I just kind of hung around at the right opportunity, took advantage of an opportunity when disc jockey was on for his third shift in less than 24 hours. Early the night of my debut on WNPQ, and got a call the next morning. They liked what I did and wanted to know if I was open that evening. Kind of like Jim, I lived on a farm at the time and threw my chores aside and come in to work that shift and signed a time card, and it was from there, the rest was history.
So on the radio side, Kevin, you really know historically, you've been a part of all the changes, format changes, adding new stations. You've kind of gotten to see firsthand, you've kind of witnessed all that happening, yes?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and also I could say I've lived it. But what has been my key element is the passion. I was, even as a kid to the community here, it would have been about the time WNPQ went on that I recognized the tower and the light on top flashing as well. And going back to 1969 when the tower was erected.
Wow.
But to go to 400 feet. There was a tower already there, but that was for WBTC. And it was only at a height of 160 feet. And then when Jim got granted license for WNPQ, he just put the additions onto the current tower to raise it to where now it's at almost 400 feet.
Now, someone unfamiliar with radio would be thinking, why is that important? What's the difference there? There's really an amazing difference there about the foot of the tower and how high they go up and how tall they are. Explain to us.
Well, I'll try to be as brief as possible. The difference is, for example, with the AM, the permitted tower was the importance of the signal for the height and the wattage. WBTC, which came on in 1963, was a daytime-only radio station. There's a lot of those stations that still exist today. And, it works off on a ground system It's non-directional, so it only requires one tower with a what they call a copper grid underneath the ground. But for the reasoning, have to raise the tower. Now you're talking about FM signal, megahertz, which is more line-to-line sight. And to get above the hills, to get the signal out properly and everything, it needed to be raised to what the consultant engineer who designs these things was to reach the 400-foot height. And then put the antennas attached to the side. It doesn't work off the tower as the AM does, except its life is the height to stay on the air so it can go through the average terrain is the terminology.
So that's the difference really between a radio station that we stop hearing once the sun goes down and a 24-hour station. Yeah,
and one thing you got to give Jim credit for. I know of another local station out of Coshocton that didn't take advantage of, and this doesn't come very economically. It can be expensive, but he was able to go in the stages, which helped BTC to stay on 24/7 back in 1999, if I recall right, or 98. And with that being said, it was where other stations didn't take advantage of that, but Jim did. And so we grew with WBTC for what tools the FCC would permit. And of course, the next step was the translators, and that just changed everything to put AM stations, daytimers onto FM frequency, and the rest is history.
I'm going to throw this out to both of you. Why is radio such an important thing in our lives?
Well, I think radio, first of all, as Natalie mentioned, it was the catalyst of actually broadcasting before television was fully developed. And that being 1920, when it first hit the airways, the first station on the air was KDKA out of Pittsburgh. And as of today, they still carry those call letters. I just have to throw this little bit of information in with that to help the listeners know that they hear all of our call signs like with a W in front of it. And it was one of the first things that the FCC did as radio stations were going west as well and developing to help put a divider on that, I guess, from east to west, was east of the Mississippi started with a W, and the K was that, identify it that it was west of the Mississippi was the language. But to answer your question, it was just the catalyst, as I say, to when television got similar ideas of its development to what we see today. And of course, one more than that was satellite.
Yeah, right. Natalie, I'd love to know your thoughts on our relationship with radio.
So our relationship with radio is pretty much the vision that Jim had for communicating with the community and being a support to the community. In fact, when I was reading his charter, it was very fascinating that some of the things that he was very pointed about was taking an active point of what the community wants to know about what's going on. There was a point that was in the charter where it talked about looking at ways to encourage students to learn about radio. And it was kind of funny because that's where a lot of people got their start with radio, was through Jim. And back then, when he was trying to get people to be very interested in it, he felt it was really important that this broadcasting company would be a way to encourage students, and there was a part that was written in there about how to encourage people to have a proper place in the adult life of the community. So that was something that when I'm looking in the things that Jim has in his room, it was all about the community. It was all about his support to the community, and that's one of the things that I believe is a key element of both radio station is reaching out. And I think that's one of the things that, Susie, you do, just with your session of where you reach and you communicate and connect with people. I think that both radio stations and the format design of trying to, listen to what our customers want, listen to what's appeasing to them, and then communicate it in a way that is encouraging. I mean, here we are with radio being the 100th year. It's a free method, okay? It's a free device that people can take a part of. So I think that, I see the vision here of continuing on what Jim started. Jim was a pioneer, and I think with both radio stations, we will continue to think about how that connection is with the community.
Mm-hmm. We're visiting with Natalie Lupi, Kevin Baker from Tuscarawas Broadcasting Company. We're going to take a short break. Be back in a minute. You're listening to Our Community. Welcome back to Our Community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. Having a fun time taking a trip down memory lane, talking to Natalie Lupi and Kevin Baker from Tuscarawas Broadcasting Company. Natalie, you're rather newer in this industry. How did you get involved?
Well, about 3 years ago, Jim was sort of declining in his health, and so he had asked me, I'm his niece, and he had asked me to become his power of attorney and sort of handle some of his affairs, which, sort of growing up, being a younger person in Jim's family, Jim was like a brother to me. So, and I felt like, okay, there's ways that, I can share some of my experiences being administration, CEO of a school organization, the County Board of Developmental Disabilities, and Council of Government. So I had agreed to help Jim with his affairs, and so my cousin and I were bequeathed his estate with his radio stations, and my cousin, Paul Fanti, and I have stepped up in the last 3 years to continue Jim's legacy.
Yeah. What have you found so surprising or enlightening about it? What surprised you?
So what surprised me is the amount of details in running a radio station, understanding requirements of the FCC, how it's funded, the whole piece about the customer service, and selling airtime, public service announcements, and especially the details of the FCC requirements, what it takes to really run an organization. Also, then incorporating how do you adapt to some of the changes in broadcasting with, the digital media, the digital kinds of advertising, right, and that impact, yet again, be able to look at the financial side of it and continue to look at how things progress. We've met some challenges, and then with the COVID hitting us, that has not been a very small task. So it's been a new learning experience. I always tell people that this is one good way that I will continue to keep my brain active, because it's been learning something every single day. And I've been rolling up my sleeves, not afraid to step in, and with the help of the staff that we have from both stations, I've been able to start to learn and have a heck of a lot more to learn.
There must be something in the DNA, because here you are on a whole second career, and that's what he did. He worked 30 years in television and then started a radio station, not just one radio station, but a series, a whole team of them. I love that here was a man about to celebrate his, I believe, 98th birthday, and he started a new FM station down there. Kevin, you were part of that when WBTC AM also added WBTC FM, and this was not a young man doing this. Talk to me about that.
Well, Jim always looked at ways, as I mentioned earlier, to keep BTC on the air 24/7. Just to touch back real quick in history, in 1963 is when WBTC went on the air on December 13th. But prior to that is that he was already thinking ahead. As Natalie said, he was always thinking. And he was already in the midst of seeking an FM in 1963, wow, before he ever had WBTC on. He was seeking and also went through the full formality and applied to the FCC at that time, which means requires an engineer to put together all that information. And he had chosen a frequency, and the wattage would be just common at 3,000 watts for what he was going for in that particular area of the frequency. Mm-hmm. So he picked 101.7 FM as his start. And anyway, it just like any other time, when you do something through the FCC, it takes time. And by the time he was successful was 6 years later with what we know today as the Light 95.9.
Yeah, and which went through several format changes before becoming Contemporary Christian and the Light that we know now. Natalie, as his niece, you had such a unique relationship with him. You're able to know more about what made him tick than about anybody, I would think. And let's talk about some of his really, I'm going to say the word cute and fun idiosyncrasies. Would you call him a frugal man?
Jim was as frugal as you could get, and because he grew up in the Depression years, so that he knew and he saw that with our family there was 9 children. My mother was one of the siblings, and my mother was very involved with the family. In fact, we lived with them. It wasn't for my grandparents. My mom and dad were divorced when I was very small, and so I was a part of that family. I didn't really know anything else, and the work ethic was just incredible.
Right.
We were expected, to really work. They came from Messina, Sicily, and so when they came over to this country, my grandmother was, like you said, so proud that she was a citizen,
Yes.
and she could hardly speak a lot of the English language. So I was fortunate that I could understand it, but I wasn't able really to learn all that because when I went to school, it was frowned upon, unfortunately, that somebody would come to school and speak like that. So through the years, Jim loved to bake. He was a baker. He liked to bake bread. He liked to make peanut brittle. He was a guy that he didn't want to hire anybody to do anything, so he would try to figure it out. He was the engineer here. So he was the engineer at the Channel 3 Cleveland, KYC, and he did TV engineering. He did engineering here, and he did things at our farm. So he did all of the bricklaying. He put the tile in. They had different kinds of equipment that he would, work on. Jim was a tinker, and he would like to try to figure things out. He was electronically inclined, and so he was just the kind of a person that he would work from day in to the night.
Yeah.
A lot of people would see him here, early in the morning, especially when he was a lot younger, and then he would stay even late at night. I always called him the night owl.
He loved to work. It was an amazing work ethic. And
it was his passion. It really was.
And as I say, frugal man, I can't say it without also saying generous. Because if the man is eating a peanut butter sandwich, he's going to offer you half of it. It was, have experienced that. He was really an interesting guy. Your thoughts on that?
Well, he was definitely very interesting. And, as I've looked through a lot of the documents, and like Kevin was talking about, when Jim was starting this up, you can't believe how he didn't do anything for himself. I will tell you this.
Right.
He was a kind of guy that he did not buy the lavish cars. He did not take himself on vacation. He did not buy, the expensive clothes. He didn't do anything like that. He took his money and he invested to develop buying the equipment, buying the things that he needed to do to start these stations, which it wasn't cheap. And when you're dealing with anything with FCC, people didn't realize, on the surface he may appear to be frugal, but to get this broadcasting company started, it's an expensive proposition, even back then when he was starting. So he kept thinking about all those things and trying to put that stuff in place.
Yes, and selfless, because it was all about the community and serving the community. Kevin, you got to help him through some of his later years. Talk to me about that. There he was, well into his 90s and still coming to work every day. What was that like? You're working with a legend.
It was working with a legend, but I always appreciated Jim, always back as I explained how I started in radio. And so I respect him for that, but also as we were, I guess you could say, close friends, whether it was his personal appointments or to business. one of the things I would never do is leave him out of the conversation if I had to attend a meeting that had to do with the stations. Of course, as you mentioned, with 101.9 FM for BTC, and we worked hand in hand on that. Sometimes I had to do the communicating for him and things of that nature, but he was always kept involved where he wanted to know what was going on, or I volunteered to him. So, we spent a lot of time together in his latter years, only because this is, as I say, a 24/7 operation, especially now for BTC. And so there's a lot of work that goes into things behind the scenes. But with this opportunity for WBTC, he recognized that, and we went forward with that. So another investment to the community as well.
Mm-hmm. What does the future hold? Let's talk about that now and that part of the history of Tuscarawas Broadcasting. What does the future hold for Tuscarawas Broadcasting Company? I'll throw that out to both of you.
So from my perspective is that I'm trying to use the principles. My background is in what we call Black Belt Six Sigma, which is looking at process improvement and ways to run a corporation, an organization, as efficient as possible. And in order to stay afloat, with especially with the COVID-19 and the impact that digital has had on broadcasting and the internet and those types of things, my goal is to look at how do we use those opportunities of broadcasting to incorporate in those areas and continue on and blossom. I think there's a lot of ways in which broadcasting still is a very, very valuable option for the community, for getting the message out, and for helping small businesses in particular. Jim was very passionate about the small business. I mean, we're a small business of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I want to continue to do. I think it's a great opportunity that people love the two formats. They love the WBTC, especially with the FM translator that, Kevin mentioned that was done in 2016. There's Jim in his 90s.
Yes.
And he's pushing forward as one of the first in the community to do that. What that did for the listeners was just phenomenal. And he pushed with streaming. So Jim was really very forward thinking. Yes. I want to continue that aspect. I think that WNPQ with the light, people love it. Mm-hmm. It's a format that it brings passion to people. It's comforting. It gives them the message. And those two radio stations, I think, have an opportunity to contribute to small businesses, contribute to the community, and to thrive.
We have some business people listening right now, and they're thinking, I really ought to be doing more advertising. How can they do that?
They can do that by contacting either radio station. They can contact Big Hits at 740-922-2700. They can go to our website at www.wbtclive.com, or they can contact The Light, which is at www.thelight95.9.com, and they can contact us at that radio station, which can be called at 330-492-9590. And we have a lot of different promotions. We have a lot of opportunities to share how we can get the message out in a very economical, feasible way. We use digital by incorporating them into our website, Facebook, and then merge that where we can drive towards their message, get their message out on the different formats. And then we have a lot of customers that listen to both Big Hits, which covers the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and The Light, which is the Christian contemporary music and the teaching.
Natalie Lupi, Kevin Baker from Tuscarawas Broadcasting Company, thank you so much for all you do in our community.
You're welcome.
Thank you.